Good evening. So I seen that I don't know if it's true or not, or if it's been verified, that those people that are going to be moved into that complex up in Clonmel are coming on, I think, the 1st of May, right? And there's been the original sort of cop out, get out of jail card for people in terms of responding to that. As soon as I'm going back to the time when we first heard and knew that this thing was going ahead in the first place, last year sometime, right? Was that it's going to be Ukrainian families, right? It's going to be mothers and children up there, and well, you can't really begrudge them that, can you? This sort of thing. That's after shifting, right? And people are in the town are concerned now, right? You'll get, and I'm going to talk about them, but the people are concerned about it now because they're paying attention to what's going on around the country, right? So those who would have been excusing it or condoning it in some way, a lot of these people's perception or a lot of these people's understanding or reaction to it is after shifting. And I've said this at the start because it's worth, it can keep you sane as well, right? But it's also just good for flexing the mind a bit, right? That we don't know. I have no idea who's going to be going in there. I could make a fairly educated guess, right? And I could put money on it, and I could probably be pretty sure that the money I put on my guess, right, would turn out to be a correct guess. But I also understand that it would still be a guess, right? That I don't have full knowledge. I don't have ears to the ground or in the ins and outs of these meeting rooms or whatever, if there's even any of them going on, right? I don't know. I can't read the future, but I can read the present fairly well, right? And you build from that, right? So if something, it's not a guarantee, but if something has been looking like this for consistently in different places at different times consistently, then the next time there's an instance that resembles the original one is probably going to be more of the same, right? Okay. And this is, what do you call it? Pattern recognition. Just paying attention to reality and accepting it as it presents itself to you. But a lot of people don't want to do that, okay? And a lot of people will hide behind, because it's nice to do, right? They will hide behind, and we're all guilty of this in our lives in some way or another, right? Of hiding behind the potential that causes the least disruption to you and poses the least danger or threat to you and your life and all that are a part of it. So we kind of hedge our bets on that, right? But I will pose this question because we've seen a few of these iPass centres that were scheduled around the country based on people power, people presence, and people pressure, right? That they've been folded up and rescinded, right? So they're not going to be going ahead as of today, anyway. So what does that tell us? It tells us that what you do and what you say does matter, right? It does matter. And all governments, particularly ones that are as flaky and as cowardly and are solely put in position and commanded while in that position to just hold the line, right? That's all they've been doing, is just continue with what you're doing and dispute or reject or lie about anything that runs counter to the position that you've been paid to hold in this Irish government, right? So they all know they're on shaky ground, right? They've probably been given promises of protection, of a future way out of Ireland. You see Leo Varadkar going to America to pick up some lecturing gig, right? So you can imagine they all have their eye on that sort of thing, right? And I think like the Conor McGregor statement, well, it's obvious to everyone, it was well put, right? That you don't get to destroy Ireland and walk around freely as if not never happened and you'd certainly no part in it. You don't get to do that in Ireland. Because you can't go, if you're from Tipperary, you can't go to Dublin and walk around for the day and not run into someone you know, right? It's the same across the whole country. You can't go to another county and not run into somebody that you know, right? So this government are aware of that, and they're going to plough ahead. And it doesn't mean they're not listening. They're paying attention. They're just not responding in the way that people would want them to respond. But there has been pressure applied, and you can see that in some of the things that they're taking a step back on, like acknowledging that the people that are here, a large amount of them have no identification, acknowledging that a large amount of them, if not the majority, are single men, acknowledging the fact that they don't have to meet the same daily criteria to exist in this country that Irish people do. Tax, insurance, all that sort of stuff, right? Rent even. So there's an admission of all of these things, and it might just be a case of, well, look, we know the damage is done now, so owning up to it. Who cares? You know, the damage is done, so owning up to it isn't going to stop. Which opens up a fascinating question, right? So, given the amount of people that have come here, do this government, in whatever plan or project they're a part of, do they believe that the means that they needed to have in place in order to facilitate whatever goal or agenda they're involved in or aimed at, do they feel comfortable enough now to own up to these things because they have everything in place? Maybe, right? And these are questions that need to be pondered, not necessarily answered right now, right? But to be pondered by people, because the danger of not allowing that, just natural, organic, turning the thing over in your mind and looking at it from many different ways, right? Or in many different ways. The danger of denying yourself that, overriding your own instincts, because that's what it is that you end up putting yourself in a position or taking a position that you convince yourself is a guarantee and a certainty for the future, when you can't guarantee that, right? So the idea that even there's no link between immigration and crime, that's just a world-class stupid comment, right? Because all you need to show that to be stupidity is one immigrant that has committed a crime in Ireland. That's all you need, right? But it's not about being factual, right? It's about creating as much psychic antagonism in people's minds, right? So your minds are like that, because on the newspaper in the shops, you're reading of a foreign guy that came in and cut someone's heads off, right? And then you're being told there's no link between immigration and crime. So you're like, how could both of them can't be true, okay? And what that is cognitive dissonance, and we know that term has been thrown around a lot. But what it essentially means is that you're attempting to understand or to hold and accept two contradictory statements at the same time. And you can invoke a deity or a god here if you want, or you can just look at the sublime architecture and the structure of reality itself, right? And recognize that there is all of our central stars, right? Our north stars, our central poles is the truth. And when you lie, your life becomes more difficult. You become slightly hostile to yourself, right? You have to constantly overthink things when you lie, because you have to try and remember it. And right, what is the quote that no one has a good enough memory to be a good liar, right? That kind of thing. But we're at our centre and we're at our most relaxed when we're being honest and open, and we're not shielding anything, we're not hiding anything, right? So when you're asked to accept these two blatantly contradictory statements at the same time, the fact that we have many, many stories of immigrants committing crimes in Ireland, but we're told that there's no link between immigration and crime, right? Your mind gets rattled. And when people are experiencing that, they want the dis-ease in their mind to be neutralized. They want it to stop, right? So they will look for any sort of perch or standing ground that will allow them to alleviate that nervous energy in them, right? And what the long-term tolls of that are going to be for people will be mental breakdowns and physical disease. That it's par for the course. You cannot live a life of deceit and also have somewhat of a conscience, right? I wouldn't say so much for some people, because you know the idea of you can't kill a bad thing, and horrible creatures seem to live forever, right? Because I would suggest they have no conscience that is imposed on them, or is that that is weighing them down, right? It is when you have somewhat of a human conscience and a bit of empathy for people, but you choose to go against that for the sake of not facing reality and not facing the harshness of the truth, and as it presents itself here, and as it presents itself in the world, right? So I think long-term people are going to suffer from the cowardice they're displaying at the moment. And the main point I wanted to get to here is that for people in Clonmel, you had an opportunity to stand out with people from Clonmel last year when they were protesting this place. You have another opportunity now, and in the days counting down to when these people arrive, every day is an opportunity. Every hour is an opportunity to go and do something and go and say something. But if you're fully convinced, or even 99% convinced, that these people are going to be brought in and put into confined space, right, prison essentially, because they're going to be security around, fences around, fancy prison. If you're comfortable with that, and you accept or expect that there's not going to be any issues arising from that, I would just ask you to contemplate one thing. What if you're wrong? What if your guessing on the future turns out to be drastically incorrect? Are you prepared for that? So, in order for your idea of what the future is going to bring to be proven incorrect, all you need is that one or two bad things happening up there, right? Now, if they all butcher each other up there, who cares? Who cares, right? That's no one. Who cares? Because it's a bad thing to have happen here, but I would imagine most people don't care. It's when it bleeds out onto the streets and bleeds out onto the houses that are 20, 50 feet away from this place, right? The gates of this place, at least. That's when there's a problem. And that's when people's indecision and inaction moves from a personal preference and a personal choice into consequences for other people, right? Because you can't live in this world solely believing that the decisions you make and the choices you take and the actions you take have no bearing on other people, right? That'd be a nice way to live, because you can just live as reckless as you want if you want, and again, your conscience is clear, because nothing I do matters to people, right? But it does, because if there was enough noise made in Clonmel and enough people came up and all supported each other, that thing wouldn't be going ahead, and that still doesn't have to go ahead. If you have enough people to just look around and say, hang on a second, there's been a few of these places pulled across the country, why should we accept it? Why should we accept this thing going ahead? No one asked for this. This was not on anyone's wish list for 24, 25, right? And if it was, grand, you're the exception. And we should not base our decisions or what happens to a town on the exceptions. So, off you go. Stay on the edge there. But for those who decided not to do that, and for all of us, right? But particularly those that decided not to do that, I would say this. These men that are moved in here, statistically more than likely single men, right? Not Ukrainians. They may turn out to be 100% peaceful, right? Maybe. And you can rest at ease, and your life will not be disrupted, and no increase in danger or nervousness around the place will befall you or your family. The other extreme of that, and it's not a nonsense, right? It's not a nonsense. History is replete with this stuff. Sleeper agents, people being brought in to destabilize regions, right? Empires are built on this stuff. Empires are built on this stuff, and so they fall by it the same way, right? There is absolutely nothing to disparage the idea or to reject it offhand that these people are brought in to control a population that is more and more disgruntled, apathetic, moving through the motions and emotions, and getting very angry, hostile to the government, and a deep, deep threat to their positions of power, right? If not their lives, because we've seen that too. We seem to believe that all of the bad things happened before, and we've all learned from that, and we all learned the lesson that we shouldn't really do the bad things again. That is a nonsense. That is being victim to seeing time as a linear thing, right? It isn't. It isn't. Nature tells us so. Winter comes and goes around again, right? Nature repeats the bad things, the death and decay, the falling apart, the wasting away, right? Nature repeats these cycles. So do we. So do we. And in Ireland, it looks like about 60, 70 years. Go back through your history. About 50 to 70 years, in between there is violence, chaos, right? We're on that trajectory here. If you take the Troubles, the start time of the Troubles, right? We're about that. Into the over 50 years since the start of that. And then another 50 or so years prior to that, we had the Civil War, right? And you can go on and on and on back through the time. About between 50 and 70 years in Ireland, violence erupts. And I think we're on the threshold of that at the moment, right? Again, this is just reading the patterns of history. It's not making anything up. It's just reading the patterns of history and saying, right, there seems to be some sort of logic there that I don't fully understand, but it's present and consistent enough for me to apply that into my guessing on what could and will maybe happen in the future, right? But let's assume that these guys are brought in for nefarious reasons, okay? And let's assume that you are optimistic that the outcome is going to be a positive one, because you don't believe what people are saying. You don't buy into the doom and gloom and the fear and all that sort of stuff, right? I would imagine then that you also leave a window open for the potential of things that you don't expect to happen, right? So I would suggest, or I would expect, that those who didn't get up and do anything because what's the big deal, nothing's going to happen, it's going to be grand, to safeguard themselves and their family, they came up with some sort of plan in case it all goes south. And if you haven't, I would say, why haven't you? Would that not be the sensible thing to do? So essentially, are you prepared for worst case scenario? That all of these lads that are being shipped in here and shipped and dotted around the country, encircling villages, towns, in the centres, ready to fall in and blow out, right, in potential. What has your preparation been for that worst case scenario? Have you prepared for that? Because if you haven't, then you really are living in a bit of a fantasy land. You really are living in a bit of a fantasy land. And that fantasy will put people, yourself and your family, in more danger than they would need to have been, right? So there is still time to just stand up and say what you don't want. That's all people are asking from you. Just stand up and say, I don't want this. That's all you can expect from another person. Just be honest and be courageous enough to stand up and speak your honesty, right? I don't want this. I never asked for this. I have no interest in paying for this. And I certainly don't want my money robbed off me and funneled into these things that serve me no purpose, that increase the fracture in the town, right? That pit people against each other just on their very presence, regardless of any negative outcome. Just the very fact of these things being here. It is a weight that people are being asked to carry. It is a financial burden and an obligation that they're being forced to pay for. And most of the men around are going, it's crazy. So I would expect the men that have nothing to say have nothing to worry about, because they're fully prepared in case this whole thing goes belly up. But I don't think that's the case, right? I think a lot of men have been hoodwinked into silence here. And whatever that thing is that's keeping you silent, that's for you to grapple with. It's probably different for everyone. It might be a wife, it might be kids, it might be family, it might be your job, right? But there's something that's stopping people from standing up and saying, I don't want this. I don't want this. And I'm sick of having my money robbed from me to pay for things that are potentially incredibly dangerous for me. Right? So there's a few days left. It'd be great, I think, if people at Clonmel really decided that they don't want that here, they'll stop it. It's as simple as that. You just have to want to stop it. Right? And then if people decide that they don't, well, you have to suffer the consequences of it then. Good, bad, or indifferent, right? And I'm certainly not willing to gamble with people's lives and say, just sit back there and you'll be all right, don't worry about it, the government have this, right? You can't be that crazy and naive, right? So I would like to hear what people's preparations are. Personally, more than anything, right? Instead of declaring everything you're doing online for the world to see, right? But if people of Clonmel and any men around the country as well, are you prepared in case this thing goes belly up? What preparations have you made? And if not, then why not? Because to admit that you haven't made any preparations means you're not in a position to be able to handle the potential fallout of this if it does go that way. And how can you explain that to your partner or to your kids, right? How can you explain that? Would you be able to say 100% to your children's faces, you need not worry about what happens up there because it's all going to be okay? Can you say that to them? If you can't, then you're lacking and you know there's a problem. So the next thing to do would be stand up and say what you don't want and what you do want. Right? We'll see.